The stagecoach lurched violently as the wheels struck a deep rut, sending Rose Abernathy tumbling from her precarious perch on the edge of the bench seat. Her scream pierced the afternoon air as she crashed through the poorly secured door and landed with a sickening crack in the muddy road. The pain that shot through her leg was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a white-hot poker of agony that made her vision swim with black spots. "Help me, please." She cried out, reaching toward the stagecoach that was already pulling away, the driver either oblivious to her fall or unconcerned. The other passengers, two elderly women and a businessman who had barely acknowledged her during the 3-day journey, peered out with shocked expressions, but no one moved to stop the driver. "Stop, there's been an accident." Rose called again, her voice breaking as she tried to drag herself upright, only to collapse back into the mud when her leg gave way beneath her. Rain had been falling steadily for 2 days, turning the trail into a quagmire of sticky brown muck that now coated her traveling dress and once pristine gloves. The stagecoach disappeared around a bend in the road, the sound of horses and wheels fading into the steady patter of rain. Rose lay back, tears mixing with raindrops on her face as the reality of her situation sank in. 22 years old, thousands of miles from her home in Boston, and now abandoned on a muddy road somewhere in Wyoming Territory with what she was certain was a broken leg. "This wasn't how it was supposed to be," she whispered to the gray sky. The letters from Mr. Edwin Thompson had promised so much: a respectable marriage, a comfortable home, a new beginning far from the painful memories of her family's financial ruin following her father's death. She had answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride with trepidation but hope. Now that hope seemed as broken as her leg, Rose tried again to move, to find some shelter from the rain, but every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her limb. The nearest town, the one where Edwin Thompson waited for his bride, was still miles away according to the driver's earlier comments. No one would be looking for her until the stagecoach arrived without her, and even then, who would know where to search? The sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap. Someone was coming. Rose struggled to sit up, waving her arms frantically. "Help, over here," she called, her voice hoarse with pain and fear. A rider appeared around the bend, tall in the saddle atop a powerful chestnut stallion. The man slowed his horse, peering through the rain at the unexpected sight of a woman sitting in the mud of the trail. What in tarnation? His deep voice carried easily over the sound of the rain as he guided his horse closer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but Rose could see a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. "Thank God," Rose breathed. "Please, sir, I've fallen from the stagecoach. My leg, I think it's broken." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching her with caution. Up close, Rose could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with intense blue eyes that assessed her situation quickly. He crouched beside her, mindless of the mud soaking into his worn denim pants. "Name's Dawson Reed," he said, his gaze moving from her face to her awkwardly splayed leg. "Ranch owner about 10 miles west of here. What's your name, Miss Rose Abernathy?" she replied, wincing as another bolt of pain shot through her leg. "I was traveling to Copper Creek. I'm to be married." Something flickered across Dawson's face, surprise, perhaps, or concern. "Copper Creek's still a good 15 miles from here. You say you fell from the coach, and they just left you?" Rose nodded, embarrassment heating her cheeks despite the chill of the rain. The door wasn't properly latched. "When we hit that large rut, I fell. I don't think the driver even noticed." Dawson's expression darkened. "Jasper Brady's been driving that route for years. Man's more concerned with making good time than the welfare of his passengers." He carefully examined her leg without touching it. "Can't tell how bad the break is, but we need to get you out of this rain and mud before fever sets in." He stood, his expression thoughtful. "My ranch is closer than Copper Creek. I can take you there, get that leg tended to, then send word to whoever's expecting you in town." "Mr. Edwin Thompson," Rose supplied, her teeth beginning to chatter from cold and shock. "He's my intended," Dawson nodded, though something in his expression suggested he knew the name. "I'll need to move you, Miss Abernathy. It's going to hurt, but I'll be as careful as I can." Rose nodded, bracing herself. Dawson's strong arms slid beneath her, one supporting her back, the other under her knees. Despite his warning, she wasn't prepared for the wave of agony that washed over her when he lifted her. A cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. "I'm sorry," he murmured, holding her firmly against his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, a reassuring rhythm against her cheek. "It's all right," she managed, fighting back tears. "Better than staying in the mud." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's the spirit." He carried her to his horse, which stood patiently nearby. "This is going to be tricky. I need to get you up in the saddle." With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Dawson managed to settle Rose sideways on the saddle, arranging her injured leg as comfortably as possible. She clutched the saddle horn with white-knuckled fingers as he mounted behind her, one strong arm wrapping securely around her waist. "Lean back against me," he instructed. "I won't let you fall." Rose had no choice but to trust him, to relax against the solid warmth of his chest as he guided the horse forward at a walk. Every step sent jolts of pain through her leg, but the alternative remaining in the mud as night approached was unthinkable. "Mr. Reed," she said after they had traveled in silence for several minutes, "I'm extremely grateful for your assistance." "Just Dawson is fine," he replied, his breath warm against her rain-dampened hair. "And no thanks needed." Couldn't very well leave a lady in distress, especially not with night coming and coyotes prowling. The casual mention of coyotes made Rose shudder. How naive she had been, thinking her journey west would be a simple matter of enduring a long train ride followed by a stagecoach trip. Nothing in her sheltered Boston upbringing had prepared her for the harsh realities of the frontier. "How much farther?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady as each step of the horse sent fresh waves of pain through her leg. "Another few miles," Dawson replied. "My place isn't much to look at, but it's dry and warm. Mrs. Colton, my housekeeper, will help get you settled. She's had some experience with broken bones." "You have a housekeeper?" Rose couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. She had imagined a solitary existence for this rugged cowboy. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Martha Colton and her husband Joe have been with me since I started the ranch 5 years ago. They're more family than employees." Rose absorbed this information, finding comfort in the knowledge that there would be a woman present. Traveling alone as an unmarried woman was scandalous enough. Arriving injured at a strange man's home would have been beyond improper without a chaperone of sorts. The rain began to ease as they crested a small rise, and Rose caught her first glimpse of Dawson's ranch in the valley below. A substantial log house stood proudly in the center, with a large barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Fenced pastures stretched in multiple directions, and even from this distance, she could see cattle grazing on the lush grass. "Welcome to Reed Ranch," Dawson said, a note of pride in his deep voice. "It's lovely," Rose replied honestly, surprised by the scope of the operation. This was no humble homestead but a thriving cattle ranch that spoke of hard work and prosperity. As they approached the house, a plump woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch, her expression changing from welcome to concern as she noted Rose's presence and obvious distress. "Dawson Reed, what have you brought home now?" she called, hurrying down the steps despite the lingering drizzle. "Found Miss Abernathy on the trail to Copper Creek," Dawson explained as he reined his horse to a stop. "Fell from the stagecoach, broken leg, I reckon." Martha Colton's weathered face softened with sympathy. "Poor lamb, let's get you inside and out of those wet clothes." She directed a pointed look at Dawson. "You'll need to carry her in, and then make yourself scarce while I tend to her." "Yes, madam," Dawson replied with a hint of amusement. He dismounted carefully before reaching up to lift Rose from the saddle. Despite his obvious effort to be gentle, she couldn't suppress a whimper of pain as he settled her in his arms. "Sorry," he murmured, his blue eyes meeting hers with genuine concern. "It's not your fault," Rose assured him, acutely aware of his strength as he carried her toward the house. The rain had plastered her traveling dress to her skin, and she felt a blush creep up her neck at the impropriety of the situation. The interior of the house was a pleasant surprise clean, well furnished, and far more civilized than Rose had expected of a bachelor's home in the Wyoming Territory. A fire crackled welcomingly in a large stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over polished wooden floors and comfortable-looking furniture. "Guest room's ready," Martha said, leading the way down a short hallway. "Joe just put fresh linens on the bed yesterday." Dawson carried Rose into a small but charming bedroom, laying her gently on a patchwork quilt that covered a sturdy oak bed. "I'll leave you ladies to it," he said, backing toward the door. "I'll ride into town tomorrow to let Thompson know what's happened." Rose caught his hand before he could leave. "Thank you, Mr. Reed Dawson. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion Rose couldn't quite identify before he nodded and slipped from the room, closing the door behind him. Martha Colton moved efficiently around the room, lighting a lamp and stoking a small fireplace in the corner. "Let's get you out of those wet things before you catch your death," she said briskly. "Then I'll have a look at that leg." Rose submitted to the older woman's ministrations, grateful for her matter-of-fact approach and gentle hands. The process of removing her mud-soaked traveling dress and undergarments was painful and humiliating, but Martha's reassuring presence made it bearable. "Land's sakes, child, you're nothing but skin and bones," Martha commented as she helped Rose into a clean nightgown that she produced from a dresser drawer. "Don't they feed young ladies back east?" Despite her pain, Rose managed a small smile. "I've had a difficult few months," she admitted. "My father passed away last winter, leaving considerable debts. Our home and possessions were sold to satisfy the creditors." Martha clucked sympathetically as she carefully examined Rose's injured leg. The limb was swollen and discolored from mid-calf to ankle, the skin an angry purple red. "So you decided to become a mail-order bride," Martha said, her tone carefully neutral as she gently probed the injury. "To Edwin Thompson," Dawson said. Rose nodded, wincing as Martha's fingers found a particularly tender spot. His letters seemed kind and his circumstances comfortable. "He owns the mercantile in Copper Creek, I believe." Was Martha's only response as she straightened. "Well, this is definitely broken, but it's a clean break from what I can tell. We need to set it and splint it proper. It's going to hurt something fierce, I won't lie to you." Rose swallowed hard, steeling herself. "Do what you must." Martha squeezed her hand. "You're a brave one. I'll fetch Joe to help. He's got steady hands and some whiskey to dull the pain a bit." Left alone, Rose took in her surroundings more carefully. The room was small but comfortable, with curtains at the window and a colorful rag rug on the floor. A framed sampler on the wall read, "Home is where the heart finds peace," the stitches neat and even. It was a far cry from the elegant Boston townhouse where she had grown up, but there was a warmth here that transcended mere physical comfort. Her thoughts turned to Edwin Thompson and their arrangement. They had exchanged a series of increasingly personal letters over the past 3 months, culminating in his proposal and her acceptance. He had sent money for her passage west, along with a modest gold band that now rested on her finger. At 38, he was considerably older than her 22 years, but his letters had spoken of kindness and security, the two things Rose desperately craved after the tumultuous period following her father's death. The door opened, admitting Martha and a tall, thin man with kind eyes who Rose assumed was Joe Colton. "Miss Abernathy, this is my husband, Joe," Martha confirmed. "He's going to help me set that leg." Joe nodded respectfully. "Miss, wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "As do I, Mr. Colton," Rose replied, attempting a brave smile. Martha held out a glass containing a generous portion of amber liquid. "Drink this down, all of it." Rose had never tasted whiskey before, and the first sip made her cough and sputter. Martha was insistent, however, and Rose eventually managed to swallow the entire contents of the glass. Almost immediately, a pleasant warmth spread through her body, dulling the edges of her pain. "Good girl," Martha approved. "Now, Joe's going to hold you steady while I set the bone. You just hold on to this." She placed a rolled piece of leather between Rose's teeth. "Bite down when it hurts." What followed was the most excruciating experience of Rose's life. Despite the whiskey, The pain of having her broken bone manipulated back into alignment sent white-hot flashes of agony through her entire body. She bit down on the leather, muffling her screams as tears streamed down her face. When it was finally over, Rose lay trembling and exhausted, her leg now encased in a splint fashioned from pieces of wood and strips of cloth. Martha gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with a cool cloth. "You did well, child," the older woman said softly. "The worst is over now. The bone will need time to knit, but you're young and healthy. 6 to 8 weeks of keeping weight off it, and you'll be right as rain, 6 to 8 weeks. The implications of this time frame slowly penetrated Rose's whiskey-fogged and pain-addled brain. "But Mr. Thompson, he's expecting me." "Our wedding." Martha and Joe exchanged a glance that Rose couldn't quite interpret. "Don't you worry about that now," Martha said firmly. "Dawson will ride into town tomorrow and explain the situation. For now, you need rest." Joe nodded agreement. "I'll bring you some broth when you wake." "Best thing for healing." They left her then, dimming the lamp but leaving enough light for Rose to see should she wake in unfamiliar surroundings. The whiskey and exhaustion soon pulled her into a deep sleep, but not before she wondered what her intended would think of this unexpected delay to their nuptials. When Rose next opened her eyes, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room and the throbbing pain in her leg confusing her still drowsy mind. Then memory returned the fall from the stagecoach, Dawson Reed finding her in the mud, the excruciating process of having her broken bone set. A soft knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl and a cup of coffee. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her cheerfully. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by horses," Rose admitted honestly, pushing herself into a sitting position with a wince. Martha chuckled. "That's to be expected. But you've got good color this morning, no fever, which is a blessing." "I was worried about infection, what with you sitting in that mud for who knows how long." She set the tray on Rose's lap and helped arrange pillows behind her back for support. "Chicken broth to start, and I'll bring you some eggs and biscuits if this stays down." Rose inhaled the savory aroma of the broth gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Colton, you've been so kind." "Martha, please," the older woman corrected. "And it's nothing more than common decency. Dawson's already ridden out to Copper Creek to speak with your Mr. Thompson, should be back by supper time." Rose nodded, sipping the broth and finding it delicious. "I hope Mr. Thompson isn't too inconvenienced by this delay." Martha's expression was unreadable. A gentleman worth his salt wouldn't be concerned with inconvenience when his bride-to-be is injured. There was something in her tone that made Rose look up sharply. "You know Mr. Thompson," Martha hesitated, then sighed. "Everyone in these parts knows everyone else more or less. Copper Creek's not a large town." "And," Rose prompted, sensing there was more. "And it's not my place to speak ill of anyone," Martha replied firmly. "Mr. Thompson runs a successful business and is well respected in the community." The careful neutrality of her response only increased Rose's curiosity and concern, but she sensed that pressing further would be futile. Instead, she changed the subject. "Mr. Reed's ranch is quite impressive. Has he lived here long?" Martha's expression softened. 5 years now. Came out from Pennsylvania with nothing but determination and a head full of dreams. Worked as a ranch hand for 2 years, saving every penny. When old man Hargrove decided to sell this place and move to California, Dawson managed to scrape together enough for a down payment. She shook her head, admiration clear in her voice. "He's worked from sunup to sundown every day since, turning this into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the territory. Joe and I came on about a year after he bought the place. We were getting too old for the hard physical labor of our own homestead, and Dawson needed help with the house and the administrative side of things." "He seems very kind," Rose observed, remembering the gentleness with which Dawson had handled her despite her injury. "One of the best men I've ever known," Martha confirmed. "Never raises his voice, treats his ranch hands fair, works alongside them instead of just giving orders." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "He deserves happiness, that one. Before Rose could inquire about this cryptic statement, Martha briskly changed the subject. Now, I've laid out some clean clothes for when you're feeling up to changing. They're mine from when I was younger, so they might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can clean and mend your own things. After Martha left, Rose finished her broth and coffee, finding her strength returning somewhat despite the persistent pain in her leg. She managed to change into the borrowed dress with minimal discomfort, grateful for the fresh clothing despite its loose fit on her slender frame. The remainder of the day passed slowly. Martha brought books to keep her occupied, and Joe stopped by briefly to check that the splint was holding properly. By late afternoon, Rose was restless enough to attempt getting out of bed, using a sturdy walking stick that Joe had fashioned for her. With painstaking care, she made her way to the window, leaning heavily on the stick to keep weight off her injured leg. The view took her breath away, rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains, cattle grazing peacefully in the nearest pasture, and a stream winding its way through the property, reflecting the late afternoon sun. It's beautiful, isn't it? Rose turned too quickly, losing her balance slightly to find Dawson Reed standing in the doorway. He moved swiftly to steady her, his large hand gentle on her elbow. Careful, he cautioned, concern evident in his blue eyes. Should you be up? Probably not, Rose admitted with a small smile. But I was going stir-crazy lying in bed all day, Dawson nodded, understanding. Just don't overdo it. That leg needs time to heal properly. Did you speak with Mr. Thompson? Rose asked, suddenly remembering the purpose of his trip to town. Something flickered across Dawson's face, the same unidentifiable emotion she had noticed the previous day. I did, he was, concerned about your accident. And the delay to our wedding, Rose pressed, sensing there was more that Dawson wasn't saying. He hesitated, then sighed. He suggested that perhaps, given your injury and the recovery time needed, you might be better off returning east. Rose felt as though she'd been struck. What? Dawson's jaw tightened. I told him that wasn't possible, that you couldn't possibly travel in your condition. He then suggested that he might come out to visit you here in a few days to discuss the situation. I see. Rose's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. After all the letters, the promises, the gold ring still on her finger. Edwin Thompson's first thought upon hearing of her injury was to suggest sending her back east. I'm sorry, Dawson said quietly. I know this isn't what you expected to hear. Rose turned back to the window, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. No, it isn't, but perhaps it's revealing of Mr. Thompson's character. Dawson said nothing for a moment, then cleared his throat. Martha's putting supper on the table soon. Do you feel up to joining us, or would you prefer to eat in here? Rose straightened her shoulders, determined not to let her disappointment show. I would be delighted to join you for supper, if you'll lend me your arm. This walking stick is helpful, but I'm still rather unsteady. Dawson offered his arm without hesitation, and Rose placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of the solid strength of him as they slowly made their way down the hallway to the dining room. The meal was simple but delicious: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Martha's kitchen garden. Rose found herself relaxing in the warm atmosphere as Joe regaled them with tales of the early days of the territory, before Wyoming had begun its push for statehood. Been a lot of changes since we first came out here in '68, Joe reflected, buttering another piece of bread. More settlers every year, towns springing up where there used to be nothing but wilderness. Do you miss the old days? Rose asked, genuinely curious. Joe considered this. Miss some things: the open spaces, the freedom. Don't miss the hardships and the isolation, though. Or the Indian troubles, Martha added quietly. Dawson nodded agreement. Things are more settled now, which is good for business. We can get our cattle to market easier, bring in supplies without as much risk. How large is your herd? Rose asked, surprising herself with her interest in the ranch operations. Dawson's eyes lit up at the question. Just over 2,000 head now. Started with barely 200. We run mostly Herefords. They handle the Wyoming winters better than some breeds. The conversation continued pleasantly, with Dawson explaining various aspects of cattle ranching to Rose, who found herself fascinated by this world so different from her Boston upbringing. She had always enjoyed learning new things, a trait her father had encouraged despite the prevailing attitude that a young lady's education should be limited to social graces and household management. After the meal, Dawson helped Rose to the porch, where they sat watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "Thank you," Rose said after a comfortable silence, "for everything. Your kindness to a stranger has been overwhelming." Dawson shook his head slightly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Rose contradicted gently. "Not anyone. Certainly not the stagecoach driver or the other passengers who left me in the mud." Dawson's expression darkened. "Jasper Brady will be hearing from me about that. It's inexcusable." "How did you happen to be on that road yesterday?" Rose asked, realizing she had never questioned the fortunate timing of his arrival. "Was heading back from the northern pasture," Dawson explained. "Took the long way around because I wanted to check on a stretch of fence that's been giving us trouble." He gave a wry smile. "Guess it was lucky for both of us that fence needed attention." Rose nodded agreement, then shivered slightly as the evening air cooled. Immediately, Dawson stood and offered his arm. "You should get back inside before you catch a chill," he said, his concern evident. "Last thing you need is a cold on top of that broken leg." Rose allowed him to help her back to her room, where Martha had already turned down the bed and left a lamp burning low. At the doorway, Dawson hesitated. "Mr. Thompson said he'd ride out the day after tomorrow," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Just so you know." Rose nodded, uncertain how she felt about the impending visit from her intended. "Thank you for letting me know." Dawson seemed about to say something more, then changed his mind. "Sleep well, Miss Abernathy." "Rose," she corrected impulsively. "Please call me Rose." A small smile touched his lips. "Good night then, Rose." After he left, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts in turmoil. The disappointment of Edwin Thompson's reaction to her injury still stung, but it was tempered by the unexpected kindness she had found at Reed Ranch. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt safe, cared for. She glanced down at the gold band on her finger, then slowly slipped it off and placed it on the bedside table. 2 more days, and she would face Edwin Thompson in person rather than through the carefully composed letters they had exchanged. 2 more days to decide if the future she had planned for herself was still the one she wanted. The following day passed quietly. Rose spent much of it on the porch, having discovered that the fresh air and beautiful views did more for her spirits than remaining confined to her room. Dawson was busy with ranch work for most of the day, but he joined her briefly for lunch, bringing a slice of Martha's apple pie as a special treat. "You're looking better today," he observed, settling into the chair beside her. "Some color back in your cheeks." "I feel better," Rose confirmed. "Still sore, but the worst of the pain has subsided." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Dawson spoke again. "I've been thinking about your situation." Rose looked up, curious. "Oh, if things don't." "Work out with Thompson," he said carefully. "You should know you're welcome to stay here until you're fully recovered. No obligation." The offer touched Rose deeply. "That's incredibly generous," Dawson shrugged, appearing slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's nothing. We've got the space, and Martha enjoys having another woman around. Still, I appreciate it." Rose hesitated, then added, "May I ask you something personal?" Dawson raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Martha mentioned yesterday that you came out here from Pennsylvania. What made you leave your home to start over in such a wild place?" For a moment, Rose thought he might not answer. His gaze shifted to the distant mountains, and a shadow seemed to pass over his features. "I needed a fresh start," he finally said. "My wife died in childbirth, along with our son. There were too many memories in our hometown." "I'm so sorry," Rose said softly, heart aching for his loss. "I didn't mean to pry into painful memories." Dawson shook his head. "It was a long time ago, 7 years now. The pain doesn't go away entirely, but it changes. Becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it." Rose nodded, understanding. "That's how it's been with my father's passing. Different circumstances, of course, but the process of grief seems universal." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a comfortable one, born of shared understanding rather than awkwardness. Eventually, Dawson rose to return to his work, pausing before he left the porch. Thompson may have had his reasons for reacting the way he did, he said, surprising Rose with the change of subject. Maybe it's not fair of me to judge him. Rose considered this. Perhaps. We'll see when he arrives tomorrow. Dawson nodded and descended the porch steps, his tall figure soon disappearing around the corner of the barn. Rose remained where she was, pondering his words and the unexpected complexity of the man who had rescued her from the mud. That evening after supper, Joe produced a fiddle and played lively tunes while Martha hummed along, occasionally breaking into full-voiced song for the choruses. Rose found herself laughing and clapping in time to the music, momentarily forgetting her injury and uncertain future. Dawson surprised her by having a fine singing voice, deep and resonant, joining Martha for a rendition of Buffalo Gals that had Rose smiling broadly. When Joe struck up a slower waltz, Dawson turned to Rose with a questioning look. "I can't possibly dance," she protested, gesturing to her splinted leg. "Not asking you to dance," Dawson replied with a hint of mischief in his blue eyes. "Just thought you might like to sway a bit. Music's meant to be felt as much as heard." Before she could respond, he'd moved his chair next to hers and taken her hand, resting their joined hands on the arm of her chair as he gently guided her in a seated version of a waltz, their upper bodies moving in time to Joe's playing. It was innocent enough nothing that would raise eyebrows, even in Boston society, but Rose felt a strange flutter in her chest at the warm pressure of Dawson's hand on hers, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled down at her. When the music ended, Dawson released her hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered. Rose retired to her room shortly after, her mind in turmoil. Tomorrow, Edwin Thompson would arrive, and decisions would need to be made. Yet all she could think about was the way Dawson Reed had looked at her as they swayed to Joe's waltz, as if seeing something in her that even she didn't recognize. Morning brought clear skies and a flurry of activity as Martha prepared for their visitor. By mid-morning the house was spotless. A fresh baked apple pie cooled on the kitchen windowsill, and Rose was dressed in her own traveling outfit, which Martha had cleaned and mended. "You look lovely, dear," Martha assured her as she helped Rose arrange her hair. "Though you're still too thin. We need to put some meat on those bones." Rose smiled at the motherly concern. "If I keep eating your cooking, that won't be a problem for long." At the sound of approaching hoofbeats, Rose felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. This would be her first meeting with Edwin Thompson, the man she had agreed to marry based solely on their correspondence. Under normal circumstances, she would have been anxious enough. But now, with her injury and his initial reaction to it, her apprehension was multiplied tenfold. Dawson appeared in the doorway of her room. "He's here. Do you want to receive him in the parlor?" Rose nodded, grateful for his steady presence as he helped her to her feet and offered his arm for the walk down the hallway. In the parlor, Martha had arranged a comfortable chair for Rose with a footstool to elevate her injured leg. The man who entered the room moments later was not what Rose had expected. Edwin Thompson was shorter than she had imagined, barely taller than her own 5 feet 4 inches, with thinning brown hair and a meticulously trimmed mustache. His clothing was expensive but somehow ill-fitting, as if he had selected items based on price rather than tailoring. "Miss Abernathy," he greeted her, his voice higher than the one she had imagined while reading his letters. "How unfortunate to meet under these circumstances." "Mr. Thompson," Rose replied, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance, despite the unexpected circumstances." He took her hand briefly, his palm damp against hers. "Yes, well, this is quite the predicament, isn't it?" Martha cleared her throat. "I'll bring some refreshments," she said, disappearing toward the kitchen. Dawson remained standing by the door, his posture suggesting he had no intention of leaving Rose alone with her visitor. Thompson glanced at him with barely concealed irritation. "I appreciate your assistance to my fiancé, Mr. Reed, but I would like a private word with her, if you please." Dawson looked to Rose, clearly waiting for her preference in the matter. "It's all right, Dawson," she said quietly. "We won't be long." With obvious reluctance, Dawson nodded and stepped out, though Rose suspected he wouldn't go far. Once they were alone, Thompson took a seat across from her, perching on the edge of the chair as if afraid to fully commit to being comfortable. "This is most unfortunate timing," he began without preamble. "The wedding has been announced, preparations made. The whole town is expecting a ceremony this Sunday." "I understand the inconvenience," Rose replied carefully, "but surely a delay of a few weeks. Thompson interrupted, his expression dismayed. "I was given to understand it could be months before you're fully recovered. 6 to 8 weeks, according to Mrs. Colton," Rose clarified, "though I should be able to move about with crutches much sooner." Thompson shook his head, a petulant expression crossing his features. "This simply won't do. I need a wife who can help in the store, keep the books, maintain the household, not an invalid requiring care herself." Rose felt as though she had been slapped. "I see," she said, her voice growing cool. "So your letters expressing affection and promising partnership were contingent upon my physical utility to your business." Thompson had the grace to look somewhat abashed. "That's not what I meant. It's just the timing is poor. Perhaps it would be best if we postponed the wedding until you're fully recovered. You could return east to convalesce with family or friends." "I have no family or friends who can take me in," Rose interrupted, anger beginning to replace her initial hurt. "As I explained in my letters, my father's death left me with no resources. The money for my journey west represented nearly everything I had." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that is unfortunate." Perhaps the door opened, and Dawson strode in, followed by Martha carrying a tray of coffee and slices of apple pie. The interruption was clearly deliberate, and Rose felt a surge of gratitude toward them both. "Thought you might enjoy some refreshments," Martha said cheerfully, though her eyes were sharp as she assessed the tension in the room. "Thank you, Martha," Rose said, accepting a cup of coffee with a grateful smile. Thompson declined both coffee and pie, checking his pocket watch with obvious impatience. "I should be getting back to town. The store can't run itself." "Of course," Rose replied coolly. "I wouldn't want to keep you from your business." "We'll speak again soon," Thompson said, rising. "Once I've had time to consider the best course of action given these complications." After he departed, an awkward silence filled the parlor. Finally, Dawson spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "That man is not worthy of you." Rose looked up, startled by the vehemence in his tone. "Dawson," Martha cautioned, though her expression suggested she agreed with his assessment. "It's true," Dawson insisted. "He speaks of her injury as an inconvenience, suggests sending her back east alone with a broken leg, and clearly values her only for the work she can do in his store." He turned to Rose, his blue eyes intense. "Tell me I'm wrong," Rose sighed, the weight of disappointment heavy on her shoulders. "You're not wrong. It seems I misjudged his character entirely." "What will you do?" Martha asked gently. Rose looked down at her hands, where the gold band from Thompson was conspicuously absent. "I don't know. I can't return east. I have nowhere to go and barely enough money for a ticket. But I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely either." "You're not imposing," Dawson said firmly. "You're welcome here for as long as you need." "But no arguments," he cut her off. "Consider it settled." Martha nodded agreement. "This house has been too quiet for too long. Having you here is a pleasure, not a burden." Rose felt tears prick her eyes at their kindness. "Thank you, both of you." After Martha left to prepare lunch, Dawson remained, sitting in the chair Thompson had vacated. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know this isn't what you came west hoping to find." "No," Rose agreed. "But perhaps it's a blessing in disguise. Better to discover Mr. Thompson's true nature now than after we were married." Dawson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "When I lost Sarah, my wife, I thought I'd never find happiness again. The pain was overwhelming." He paused, seeming to search for words. "But time passed, and eventually I realized that honoring her memory didn't mean living in perpetual grief. She would have wanted me to find joy again." Rose listened, touched by his willingness to share something so personal. "What made you choose ranching? It seems such difficult work." A small smile touched his lips. "My grandfather had a small farm in Pennsylvania. Some of my happiest memories are of working alongside him as a boy." When I needed to start fresh, I remembered that feeling of building something with my hands, watching it grow and thrive. He gestured toward the window, through which the vast expanse of his ranch was visible. This land, it has a way of healing a person, of putting things in perspective. Rose could understand that. Even in the short time she had been here, the beauty and openness of the Wyoming landscape had affected her deeply. It was so different from the crowded streets of Boston, with its noise and smoke and constant bustle. "I think I'm beginning to understand the appeal," she admitted. "Though I confess the idea of winter here is somewhat terrifying." Dawson laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "It can be harsh," he acknowledged, "but there's beauty in it too. The way fresh snow blankets everything, the stillness on a clear winter morning when the sun makes the whole world sparkle like diamonds." His description painted such a vivid picture that Rose could almost see it. "You have a poet's soul, Dawson Reed." He looked momentarily embarrassed. "Don't let my ranch hands hear you say that. They already think I'm peculiar for keeping books in the house that aren't the Bible or almanacs." Rose smiled. "Your secret is safe with me." The days that followed fell into a pleasant routine. Rose's leg began to heal, and with the aid of crutches that Joe fashioned for her, she became more mobile, able to move around the house and even venture onto the porch without assistance. Each morning, Dawson would check on her before heading out to his work, and each evening he would join her on the porch to watch the sunset, sharing stories of their very different lives. Edwin Thompson sent a brief note a week after his visit, formally breaking their engagement and requesting the return of the ring Rose had already removed from her finger. She sent it back without regret, relieved to have the matter settled definitively. As the days turned into weeks, Rose found herself becoming more involved in the life of the ranch. She discovered she had a knack for bookkeeping and began helping Joe with the ranch accounts, bringing order to the somewhat haphazard system he had been using. Martha taught her to cook Western-style meals, laughing at Rose's initial disasters but praising her quick learning. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Rose sat on the porch with Dawson as usual, watching the sun sink toward the distant mountains. A comfortable silence had fallen between them, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the nearby pasture. "I received a letter today," Rose said finally, "from an acquaintance in Boston who has connections in Cheyenne. She writes that there's a position available at a school there, teaching young ladies." Dawson's expression remained carefully neutral. "That sounds like a good opportunity." Rose nodded slowly. "It would provide independence, a respectable position, once my leg is fully healed, of course." "Of course," Dawson agreed, his voice oddly flat. "Cheyenne's becoming quite civilized. You'd find more of the comforts you're used to there." "Yes," Rose said, studying his profile as he determinedly kept his gaze on the horizon. "It would be the sensible choice." Another silence fell, this one charged with unspoken words. Finally, Dawson turned to face her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "And is that what you want, Rose? The sensible choice?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Rose took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I thought it was," she admitted. "All my life I've tried to be sensible, practical. It's what my father valued, what Boston society expected." She shook her head slightly. "But these past weeks have shown me that perhaps there's more to life than being sensible." Dawson's expression softened. "Such as joy," Rose replied simply. "Connection, the satisfaction of building something meaningful." She gestured toward the ranch spreading out before them. "What you've created here, it's remarkable, Dawson, and I've come to care for it, almost as much as I've come to care for." She faltered, suddenly uncertain. "For," Dawson prompted gently, hope beginning to light his eyes. "For you," Rose finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's sudden and perhaps inappropriate given the circumstances of my arrival, but Dawson reached out, taking her hand in his. "It's not sudden for me," he said quietly. "From the moment I found you in the mud, there was something about you, a strength, a determination despite your circumstances that spoke to me." Rose's heart quickened at his words, at the warmth of his hand enveloping hers. "What are you saying, Dawson?" "I'm saying that the thought of you leaving for Cheyenne makes me realize I don't want you to go," he replied honestly. I'm saying that these sunset conversations have become the best part of my days. I'm saying that watching you adapt to ranch life, seeing your curiosity and your willingness to learn new things, it's reminded me what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow. He shifted his chair closer to hers, still holding her hand. I know you came west expecting a different life, a different man. And I know a cattle ranch in Wyoming Territory is a far cry from what a Boston-bred lady might have dreamed of. But if you could see a future here with me, I would consider myself the luckiest man alive. Rose felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. Are you proposing, Dawson Reed? A slow smile spread across his face. I suppose I am, though not very eloquently. Let me try again. He slid from his chair to kneel before her, still holding her hand. Rose Abernathy, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need security or because I need help with the books, but because I believe we could build a beautiful life together. Rose did not hesitate. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I will marry you, Dawson. The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but he sealed their engagement with a gentle kiss that promised much more to come. When they broke apart, both were smiling. Martha's going to be insufferably pleased with herself, Dawson commented, returning to his chair but keeping Rose's hand firmly in his. She's been dropping hints about us since your second day here, Rose laughed. Joe too. He told me yesterday that you hadn't smiled so much in all the years he's known you as you have in the past month. Dawson's expression grew serious again. They're right. You've brought light back into my life, Rose. After Sarah died, I never thought I'd feel this way again. Never thought I'd want to. I understand, Rose said softly. When my father died and everything fell apart, I convinced myself that practical considerations were all that mattered: security, respectability. I didn't dare hope for love. She squeezed his hand. But sometimes life has other plans than the ones we make for ourselves. Thank God for that, Dawson replied fervently, and for poorly latched stagecoach doors. Rose laughed again, the sound carrying across the peaceful ranch as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant gold, a fitting backdrop for the beginning of their unexpected love story. 6 months later, Rose stood in the bedroom she now shared with Dawson, adjusting the simple white dress Martha had helped her sew for the occasion. Her leg had healed completely, though occasionally it still ached when rain was coming, a small price to pay for the happiness she had found. The ranch was bustling with activity as neighbors and friends from miles around gathered to celebrate their wedding. Despite Dawson's offer to take her to Cheyenne for a more elaborate ceremony, Rose had preferred the idea of being married on the land that had become her home, surrounded by the people who had become her family. A knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance, her eyes misting as she took in the sight of Rose in her wedding finery. You look beautiful, dear, the older woman said, adjusting the small wreath of wildflowers that crowned Rose's dark hair. Dawson won't know what hit him. Rose smiled, her own eyes suspiciously bright. I can never thank you enough, Martha, for everything. Martha waved away her gratitude. Seeing you two happy is thanks enough. This place needed a mistress, and Dawson needed someone to remind him how to live, not just exist. She pressed a small package into Rose's hands. A wedding gift from Joe and me. Inside was a small silver frame containing a pressed wildflower, the same variety that now adorned Rose's hair. It's beautiful, Rose said, genuinely touched. It's from the spot where Dawson found you, Martha explained. Joe went back and gathered some, thought you might like a memento of where your story began. Rose hugged the older woman tightly. It's perfect. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful, held under a canopy of blue sky with the majestic mountains as backdrop. Rose walked toward Dawson without assistance, her steps sure and steady, her heart full to bursting as she saw the love in his eyes. The preacher from Copper Creek, who had made the journey specifically for the occasion, spoke of commitment and partnership, of building a life together on foundations of respect and love. When it came time for vows, Dawson's strong voice carried clearly to all assembled as he promised to cherish and protect Rose for all his days. When it was her turn, Rose's voice did not waver as she pledged herself to the man who had found her at her lowest moment and helped her rise again. The simple gold band he placed on her finger felt right in a way Edwin Thompson's never had, a symbol of a love freely given and received rather than a business arrangement. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing beneath lanterns strung from the barn rafters. As twilight deepened into night, Dawson led Rose away from the festivities to their special spot on the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" he asked, his arm encircling her waist as they looked out over the moonlit landscape. "Completely," Rose assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how much my life has changed in 6 months." From a mail-order bride with a broken leg abandoned in the mud to the wife of the most wonderful man in Wyoming Territory, Dawson pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm the fortunate one. Never thought a chance encounter on a muddy road would lead to this." Rose turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken a different route that day? If we'd never met?" "No," Dawson replied without hesitation. "Some things are meant to be, Rose. I believe we would have found each other somehow, someday." His smile was tender in the moonlight. "But I'm grateful it happened when it did, broken leg and all." "As am I," Rose agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him properly. "As am I." Years later, visitors to Reed Ranch would often comment on the unusual framed wildflower that held a place of honor in the family parlor. Few knew its significance, how it marked the unlikely beginning of a love story that had flourished against all odds in the wild Wyoming Territory. But Dawson and Rose Reed knew, and that was enough. Their union produced 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son who grew up strong and capable on the ranch that continued to prosper under their parents' joint stewardship. Rose never regretted her decision to stay, finding in the vast open spaces and honest work a fulfillment she had never imagined possible in her previous life. And each evening, no matter how busy or demanding the day had been, Dawson and Rose would meet on the porch to watch the sunset together, a ritual that began during her convalescence and continued throughout their marriage, a daily reminder of the unexpected blessing that had come from a painful fall and a muddy road. For Rose Reed, formerly Abernathy, formerly a desperate young woman seeking security through a marriage of convenience, life had taken the most unexpected turn. The broken leg that had seemed a disaster had instead been the catalyst for finding true love and happiness. Every step she took on that once injured limb was a reminder of how sometimes what appears to be our greatest misfortune can lead us exactly where we need to be. And Dawson Reed, who had once believed his capacity for love died with his first wife, discovered that the heart has an infinite ability to heal and grow. The ranch he had built as a refuge from grief became instead the foundation for a joy greater than he had ever known, proof that second chances come in the most unexpected forms, sometimes even in the shape of a bedraggled young woman with a broken leg, waiting to be carried to his saddle and, ultimately, into his heart.